The entire border cross thing fell silent when a K9 suddenly lunged at a worn-out backpack. What they found inside made time stand still. What did this loyal German shepherd sense before anyone else could? Here's what happened. But before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. The suffocating heat rose from the cracked pavement in shimmering waves, blurring the edges of reality as the endless line of weary travelers inched toward the checkpoint under the merciless sun. The air smelled of sweat, engine fumes, and the faint metallic tang of nerves stretched too thin. Border agents moved with mechanical efficiency, their eyes scanning faces, hands flicking through passports, their minds trained to spot the smallest flicker of deceit. Titan moved among them like a shadow made flesh, his powerful body gliding through the crowd with silent authority, his black and tan coat glistening under the harsh sunlight. He had done this 1,000 times before, scented 1,000 bags, brushed past countless travelers. But today, there was something different, something wrong, something that made the fine hairs along his spine bristle with unseen warning. His handler, Agent Reyes, felt the subtle change instantly. Titan's muscles bunched under the leash, his ears locked forward like twin radar dishes, his sharp eyes narrowing as his nose twitched rapidly, tasting the air for a scent that didn't belong. Without hesitation, Titan pulled toward the middle of the line, his claws scraping faintly against the pavement as he cut through the throng of anxious bodies. Travelers shifted nervously as the massive dog passed, their gazes dropping, their hearts thudding harder against their ribs, because even those with nothing to hide knew the silent judgment of a working K9 was absolute. Titan stopped abruptly, his entire body going rigid, his gaze fixed on a faded green backpack slouched carelessly against the scuffed boots of a young man near the middle of the line. The man's eyes darted left and right, his lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line, and as his trembling hands disappeared deeper into his pockets. Titan's growl started low, a rumble so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, and every conversation around them died in an instant, replaced by the tense hum of fear tightening like a noose around the gathering crowd. Agent Reyes felt his pulse spike, his free hand moving to the radio clipped at his shoulder as he signaled quietly for backup. Titan advanced one deliberate step closer, his massive head tilted slightly, his nostrils flaring as his growl deepened into a warning that left no room for misunderstanding. All eyes snapped to the backpack now, that battered and unassuming shape on the ground suddenly transformed into an object of unspoken terror. The young man took a shaky step back, his face draining of color as Titan's eyes locked onto him with unflinching intensity. Reyes tightened his grip on the leash, feeling the raw tension vibrate through the cord like a live wire. And in that suspended moment, with the sun burning overhead and the line frozen in fear, Titan stood at the threshold of history, his instincts screaming that what sat hidden inside that bag wasn't just contraband, it was the spark that could ignite devastation. And he alone was the last line between silent catastrophe and salvation. The relentless sun bore down on the border crossing with the fury of a furnace, heat radiating from the ground in shimmering waves as the line inched forward at a pace so slow it felt as if time itself had stalled. Sweat rolled down foreheads and soaked into the collars of already damp shirts. But no discomfort could distract from the sudden shift in the air as Titan's deep, guttural growl rolled through the heavy stillness like distant thunder. His massive frame stood locked in place, eyes sharp and unblinking, his body perfectly balanced between control and unleashed fury. The focus of his unwavering stare was a battered green backpack resting at the scuffed boots of a young man who looked as if he might collapse under the weight of his own fear. His fingers dug deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched forward in a futile attempt to make himself smaller, invisible. But every twitch of his body only made him stand out more against the sea of weary travelers who were now slowly stepping back, their movements cautious, their eyes wide and darting nervously between the tense figure of the man and the intimidating canine that had made him the center of the universe. Titan's growl deepened, vibrating through the soles of their feet, an ancient warning that bypassed logic and struck straight at primal instinct. The young man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, sweat trickling down his pale face in thin, unbroken streams. Agent Reyes moved forward with the practiced calm of a man who had spent years walking the razor's edge between routine and disaster, his hand tightening on Titan's leash, even though he knew it was merely a formality. If Titan decided to act, nothing short of steel would hold him back. The line had come to a complete halt now, the restless shuffling of feet and murmured conversations silenced under the oppressive weight of uncertainty. Every pair of eyes was locked on that backpack, a simple, faded thing that might have once carried textbooks or travel gear, but now sat on the hot pavement like a harbinger of something unspeakable. Reyes's voice cut through the tension, low and commanding, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. "Sir, step away from the bag." The young man's eyes darted up, his pupils wide and glassy, his breathing shallow and rapid as his feet seemed nailed to the ground. Titan inched forward, a low, menacing rumble escaping from deep in his chest as his gaze never wavered, his instincts screaming that whatever lay hidden within that battered pack wasn't just dangerous, it was catastrophic. And as the sun blazed overhead and time stretched thin under the weight of every held breath, the question hanging unspoken in the air was heavier than the heat itself. What had Titan found? And was there still time to stop it before it was too late? In a heartbeat, the air exploded with sound and motion, the silent dread that had gripped the crowd shattering like glass under the weight of Titan's ferocious snarl. His powerful frame lunged forward with a force that sent his handler, Agent Reyes, staggering to brace against the leash, every muscle in his arm burning as he fought to restrain the beast whose instincts had fully taken over. Titan's teeth flashed in the unforgiving sunlight, his snarls cutting through the thick tension like a blade through cloth, each guttural sound vibrating through the chests of those who stood paralyzed by fear. The young man's face went sheet white, his lips trembling as his wide, terrified eyes locked onto Titan with the hollow realization that this was the moment everything unraveled. His feet shuffled back, scraping against the pavement as if he could will himself away from the inevitable. But there was nowhere left to run. In an instant, the trained calm of the border agents evaporated into swift, precise action. Guns were drawn with the fluid grace of men and women who had rehearsed this scenario 1,000 times but prayed they'd never live it. Shouts filled the air, sharp and commanding, layered over the growing panic of the crowd that now pressed back against the barricades. Their eyes fixed on that battered green backpack lying abandoned in the center of the chaos like a silent predator waiting to pounce. Captain Ruiz stormed into the fray, his voice cutting above the rising noise, his arm raised to keep the agents focused and the panic contained. "Nobody move! Bomb squad is inbound," he barked, his gaze flicking from the frozen suspect to the pack that seemed to hum with unseen menace. Titan strained against the leash, his body coiled tight as a spring, his eyes burning with a primal certainty that no human could deny. The young man's knees buckled, his hands shooting up as agents descended on him, forcing him to the ground with brutal efficiency. His face pressed into the sun-baked pavement, the cracked asphalt biting into his skin as tears mingled with the sweat pouring from his brow. His voice cracked through the chaos, a choked whisper barely audible beneath the shouts and barking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not now, not him, but no one listened, their attention locked on the real threat. The solitary backpack that seemed to radiate a deadly kind of silence. Time slowed as the world held its breath, the heat of the sun paling in comparison to the cold dread that settled over every heart present. Titan stood firm, his growls low and relentless, a living barrier between life and whatever horror waited just beneath that worn fabric. And as the wail of approaching sirens pierced the thick wall of tension, it was clear to everyone watching that the line between survival and catastrophe now hung on a thread thinner than anyone dared to believe. The air had turned to stone, thick and immovable, pressing against lungs that struggled to draw in shallow breaths beneath the weight of the unknown. The blinding sun bore down mercilessly, heat waves dancing off the asphalt as if mocking the stillness that gripped every soul within the checkpoint. The bomb squad arrived in grim silence, their black suits and reflective visors gleaming like ominous specters against the harsh glare of daylight, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement with a finality that made every heart beat just a little faster. Each step they took seemed measured by fate itself, slow and deliberate, closing the distance between life and the unspeakable threat that sat quietly in the middle of. That sun-baked clearing, a tattered green backpack motionless but radiating fear like a living, breathing thing. Around it, the world stood paralyzed, travelers locked in place as if their feet had fused with the pavement, their eyes wide and unblinking, their minds trapped in a relentless loop of possibilities far too dark to fully comprehend. Mothers held their children closer, hands trembling as they shielded innocent eyes from a scene that felt like the prelude to disaster. Fathers stood rigid, their arms outstretched instinctively as if they could hold back the blast of a nightmare should it unfold. And through it all, Titan remained crouched low and still, his powerful frame taut with barely contained energy, his amber eyes locked onto the backpack with a focus so absolute it seemed as though he could will the truth from its depths by sheer force of will. His growl rumbled low and constant, a living warning that reached places no siren could touch, a sound that vibrated through the soles of every pair of boots and shoes and sandals on that burning pavement. Captain Ruiz stepped forward through the frozen sea of fear, his movements smooth and practiced, his face a mask of control forged through years of standing on the edge of moments just like this. His eyes flicked to Titan, reading the silent language of the dog's posture, understanding without question that whatever lay inside that bag was more than just a false alarm. Titan didn't posture for attention. Titan didn't make mistakes. And today, his stillness screamed louder than panic ever could. Ruiz turned his attention back to the bomb squad as they took their positions, their specialized tools glinting in the sunlight, their every motion precise as they prepared to confront the unknown. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, the air so thick it felt like drowning on dry land. A single bead of sweat traced a slow path down Ruiz's temple as he gave the quiet nod to proceed, a motion that felt like the trigger of a bomb itself. And in that terrible silence, with the sun blazing down and the lives of every man, woman, and child hanging in the balance, the truth of that unassuming backpack sat waiting, silent, patient, and poised on the edge of revealing whether this day would end in relief or unspeakable tragedy. The moment the subtle nod left Captain Ruiz's chin, the entire world seemed to collapse into a vacuum of breathless anticipation. A thin thread stretched to its breaking point as the bomb technician took that first step toward the forgotten backpack lying under the relentless blaze of the sun. Each movement was painfully slow, deliberate by necessity, but agonizing to watch. His gloved fingers gripping specialized tools with hands trained never to tremble, no matter how close the threat loomed. The weight of hundreds of lives pressed down on his shoulders. Yet his expression behind the reflective visor remained carved in stone. Around him, the sea of faces stood locked in silent paralysis, the collective inhale of a crowd waiting for a verdict they couldn't bear to hear. Titan's powerful body tensed like a drawn bow, his muscles coiled tight beneath his sleek coat, his eyes never leaving the pack that now seemed to pulse with ominous life under the technician's careful touch. His breathing slowed, nostrils flaring as he leaned slightly forward, his instincts burning through every nerve ending, telling him danger sat right there before them all, just one wrong move away from chaos. The technician knelt before the bag, his knees pressing into the sun-scorched pavement as a bead of sweat slid from his temple and disappeared under the edge of his helmet. His hands moved with haunting precision, reaching for the first zipper, the metallic teeth of it glinting harshly in the sunlight. With a practiced flick, the zipper began its slow, agonizing journey across the top of the pack, the rasp of metal on fabric cutting through the oppressive silence like a blade. Titan's ears flattened slightly, his low growl vibrating through the thick stillness, a primal warning that this was no false alarm, no harmless, forgotten belonging. Captain Ruiz stood motionless, his eyes locked on the bag as the technician peeled back the first flap. What lay beneath turned the blood in his veins to ice. A twisted web of wires, their colors ominous in their simplicity, lay coiled atop what could only be described as the unmistakable shell of a device designed for destruction. The technician froze for a half second, his training barely keeping his hand steady as he adjusted his tools and slowly lifted the wires to reveal the full extent of what lay beneath. Captain Ruiz felt his heart thud painfully against his ribs as the realization settled like lead in his chest. This wasn't just a bomb. It was carefully constructed, meticulously hidden, and clearly meant for mass devastation. And then the technician found something else, something even more chilling. Folded neatly alongside the device was a stack of papers, their edges curled from the heat, but the ink bold and deliberate. His gloved hand reached out, lifting the top sheet to reveal the scrawled words of a manifesto, each sentence a window into the mind of whoever had planned this nightmare. Titan let out a sharp, piercing bark that cracked through the tension like a gunshot, a final, undeniable warning that what had been found here today wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows over the checkpoint, every soul present knew this day would be remembered, not for what was lost, but for the horror that had been narrowly kept at bay by the instincts of a silent guardian who refused to be ignored. The second the final flap of the backpack was pulled back, the reality of what lay hidden within its depths hit like a thunderclap. Beneath the tangled, snaking mess of wires, in the cold, mechanical precision of the device, sat the undeniable face of death, a bomb crafted with chilling expertise, its components arranged not just to destroy, but to do so with maximum cruelty and precision. The bright colors of the wires seemed almost obscene against the dull fabric of the pack, each line a thread woven into a tapestry of destruction. A collective gasp tore through the frozen crowd, the sound raw and jagged as people instinctively recoiled, hands flying to mouths, eyes wide with the horror of what might have been. Feet shuffled backward against the heat-scorched pavement, the uneasy dance of fear taking hold even in the face of trained composure. Some clutched their children closer. Others whispered prayers under their breath, their voices barely audible over the growing roar of dread pounding in their ears. Captain Ruiz stood rigid, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned bone white, his mind racing through the terrifying implications. But just as the horror seemed to reach its peak, the bomb technician reached deeper, his gloved hands searching through the hidden compartments of the pack with a steady patience born of countless hours facing death eye to eye. And then, from that shadowed interior, his hand emerged holding something more insidious than the wires and circuits, a bundle of crumpled, sweat-stained papers that fluttered weakly in the hot breeze like the final breath of a dying secret. The papers were yellowed, edges curled and brittle, but the ink remained bold, each word etched with dark conviction. As the technician carefully unfolded them, the wind caught the top page, revealing the chilling title scrawled across the first line in an unsteady, furious hand, The Cleansing Hour. Captain Ruiz stepped forward, his eyes scanning the page, the sickening realization settling like ice in his gut as he read line after line of the manifesto. It wasn't just a plan, it was a declaration, a precise, calculated promise of violence, meticulously timed to unfold at this exact moment, in this very place. The words dripped with venomous ideology, filled with twisted justifications, and a cold, merciless logic that made Ruiz's stomach turn. Every detail had been thought through. Every life in that line counted. Every second of delay calculated to ensure maximum destruction. And at the heart of it all was the belief that no one would suspect a simple, forgotten backpack at a border crossing. That no one would see it coming until it was far too late. But what the architect of this horror hadn't counted on was the unwavering loyalty of a soldier who walked on four legs, a silent guardian whose instincts pierced through deception and who, without hesitation, had thrown himself between death and the innocent. Titan stood firm, his eyes still locked on the being as if daring it to betray one more hidden danger. And as the bomb squad worked to disable the device, as the last rays of sunlight glinted off Titan's watchful gaze, every heart present knew they had not just witnessed the discovery of a weapon, but the quiet, undeniable proof that sometimes salvation arrives not with sirens and fanfare, but with a single, unshakable growl. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement as the young man lay pinned beneath the weight of two agents, his face pressed into the rough surface, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. His eyes were his pupils blown and glassy and staring at nothing and everything all at once, the haunted look of a man who had already surrendered to a fate darker than prison walls. His lips moved rapidly, the words tumbling out in a low, feverish whisper that barely escaped his cracked and bleeding mouth, a mantra spoken for no one but himself. Captain Ruiz knelt beside him, his shadow falling across the young man's pale face as he leaned in close, his voice cutting through the frantic muttering with the razor-sharp authority of a man who had spent his life pulling truth from the depths of madness. "Tell me who sent you," Ruiz demanded, his tone calm but laced with steel, the weight of the near catastrophe pressing heavily on every syllable. But the young man only shook his head weakly, his voice breaking through in a cracked whisper that sent a chill racing down Ruiz's spine. "You weren't supposed to find it. Not him. Not the dog." His gaze flicked, almost involuntarily toward Titan, who stood a mere few feet away, his powerful body tense, his eyes locked onto the suspect as if daring him to try anything. Titan's low, rolling growl filled the space between them like a living threat, vibrating through the concrete and settling into the bones of every person within earshot. Ruiz followed that gaze, his own eyes meeting Titan's for a brief, unspoken moment of understanding. It wasn't just luck that had stopped this tragedy. It wasn't advanced technology or sheer protocol. It was the unwavering instincts of a soldier who needed no words to deliver justice. Ruiz turned his attention back to the suspect, his voice dropping lower, each word deliberate and heavy with intent. Who else is involved? But the young man's mind had long since retreated behind the locked doors of fanaticism, his voice rising into a disjointed chant, words blending into a sickening litany of twisted belief. It was supposed to cleanse. We were promised. The hour of reckoning. The words spilled out like poison, his body trembling beneath the agent's grip, his focus constantly drawn back to Titan, as if the dog's very presence dismantled the certainty he had once held so tightly. Ruiz stood, his fists clenched at his sides, his heart pounding with a mixture of frustration and relief. They had caught one, but the manifesto spoke of more. Plans still unfolding. Threats that hadn't yet shown their face. Titan's growl finally faded, his body relaxing just enough to step closer to Ruiz's side, his eyes never leaving the broken man on the ground. And as the sun finally sank beneath the horizon, plunging the world into the uncertain darkness of night, one truth remained painfully clear. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a hunt that would stretch far beyond the border, led not just by men in uniform, but by the loyal heart of a soldier who had already saved the world once and stood ready to do it again. The hours that followed blurred into a relentless storm of action, as the dusty pages of that manifesto became the key to unraveling a conspiracy that stretched its roots deeper than anyone could have imagined. In a cold, windowless room beneath the border facility, Captain Ruiz and his team pored over every line of the rambling document, their faces lit by the harsh fluorescent lights above and the grim realization of what they were up against. It wasn't just a one-off attempt at chaos. It was the tip of a spear pointed directly at the heart of everything they were sworn to protect. Each page revealed meticulously plotted operations hidden behind the everyday routines of an unsuspecting world. Sleeper cells embedded within communities, waiting for a signal. Hidden caches of weapons and explosives buried under the unlikeliest of places, public parks, abandoned warehouses, even beneath the concrete floors of family-owned shops. Names were scrawled in shaky handwriting, alongside code names and encrypted locations that painted a horrifying web of silent conspirators living ordinary lives by day and plotting devastation by night. They had been hiding in plain sight for years, moving unnoticed among the innocent because their methods were as simple as they were devastating. Hide behind what looks harmless, a child's backpack, a mother's diaper bag, a traveler's forgotten suitcase. And through it all ran a dangerous thread of belief, a fanatical conviction that their cause would go undetected, their acts of destruction disguised as tragic accidents. until it was too late. Captain Ruiz felt a cold sweat settle beneath his collar as he read through the final section of the manifesto, a bold declaration that their success hinged on one deadly assumption, that no human eye would see through the deception and no machine would detect what had been hidden with such cruel simplicity. But what they had failed to account for was the unwavering loyalty and razor-sharp instincts of a soldier who couldn't be misled by appearances or distracted by false innocence. Titan. That dog's unshakable focus had shattered the foundation of an operation built entirely on slipping through the cracks of human perception. Ruiz glanced over at Titan, who sat quietly at the far end of the room, his posture as proud and alert as it had been on the line hours earlier, his amber eyes watchful even in the exhaustion of the day's events. He had done what no technology could. He had felt the wrongness in the air and followed it to its bitter core. And now, because of him, every agent under Ruiz's command had a new mission: to hunt down the ghosts hiding among the living, to root out every cell, every silent conspirator who thought they could slip unnoticed through the blind spots of law enforcement. The hunt was on, the network exposed, and at the heart of it stood a canine soldier whose instincts had proven sharper than any blade, a guardian whose loyalty had cracked open a conspiracy that could have consumed them all. And as Ruiz watched Titan rise slowly to his feet, his body moving with quiet strength, he knew this fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The sun hung low on the horizon, bleeding streaks of gold and crimson across the sky as the heat of the day finally gave way to the cool breath of evening. The checkpoint, once a scene of paralyzing fear and chaos, began to stir again with cautious movement, the long line of travelers inching forward beneath the flickering lights that buzzed to life overhead. Yet despite the slow return to order, a thick undercurrent of tension still lingered in the air, a silent reminder that danger had sat at their feet and almost gone unnoticed. But Titan wasn't finished. His handler, Agent Reyes, loosened the leash, his knuckles still pale from the strain of holding back the force of a guardian that refused to rest while shadows lingered. Without hesitation, Titan moved forward with the precision of a soldier who knew the battlefield was never truly cleared until every corner had been swept and every thread exposed. His powerful shoulders rippled beneath his dark coat, his head low to the ground as he worked his way through the line, his nose drawing in the faintest traces of scent left behind by every person who dared cross that threshold. Travelers, who only hours before might have viewed him as just another working dog, now parted with silent reverence, their faces pale and awed as they stepped aside to clear his path. Some reached out instinctively, their trembling fingers brushing against his broad flank in a quiet gesture of gratitude and respect, their eyes misted with the dawning realization that this animal had stood between them and a fate too dark to speak aloud. Titan didn't pause for their touches, didn't lift his head to bask in the praise. His focus was absolute, his purpose singular. Each measured step was a silent vow that no threat would pass beneath his watchful gaze. Not today, not ever. Children clung to their other mothers, wide-eyed and quiet as they watched him work, the innocence in their faces mirrored by the quiet hope that such courage existed in a world that had seemed so fragile only moments ago. Captain Ruiz stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes following every movement of the K9, whose instincts had unraveled a plot of unthinkable destruction. There was a weight in Ruiz's chest that felt heavier now than it had when the bomb sat live and waiting, a sobering understanding that without Titan, they would be counting bodies instead of counting blessings. And as Titan completed his final sweep, his ears perked forward and his steps slowed. The entire checkpoint seemed to hold its breath one last time. His head lifted, his gaze scanning the line of anxious faces, and after a long, silent moment, he stepped calmly back to Agent Reyes' side. It was over, this time. And as the travelers exhaled in a collective wave of relief, one thought echoed through the crowd as clearly as if it had been spoken aloud. This wasn't just a dog. This was a hero. And as long as Titan stood watch, there would always be hope that even in the darkest moments, a silent protector walked among them, ready to rise and face the unimaginable without fear. The day's final light bled across the cracked pavement in strokes of gold and deep crimson, the air cooling just enough for a faint breeze to stir the lingering scent of dust and tension that hung thick over the checkpoint. Titan stood at the edge of it all, his powerful silhouette outlined against the fading glow of the horizon, his stance proud and unmoving, the embodiment of vigilance forged through a lifetime of silent battles. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the distance as if already preparing for whatever lay beyond the veil of night. The chaos of the day had settled, the danger diffused, but within Titan's steady gaze there remained an unspoken truth. This moment of peace was temporary, and his duty, his unbreakable bond to those he protected, would never truly end. Captain Ruiz stepped quietly to his side, the weight of the day's revelations etched deep into the lines of his weathered face. He knelt beside Titan, his knees cracking softly as he lowered himself, and placed a firm, steadying hand on the dog's broad shoulders. His fingers pressed gently against the thick fur, feeling the raw strength pulsing beneath, the living reminder that sometimes courage spoke loudest in silence. His voice, low and rough with emotion he didn't bother to hide, broke the hush between them. "You saved them all today, Titan, every single one." The words didn't need a response. Titan remained still, his ears twitching only slightly as the soft hum of electricity buzzed through the flickering lights overhead. The checkpoint glowing faintly back to life as the line of travelers hesitantly resumed their passage. But their steps were different now, slower, more deliberate, their eyes drawn toward the figure that stood like a monument at the edge of their path. People paused, their gazes lingering, some pressing hands to their hearts, others bowing their heads as they passed. And though no official announcement had been made, no medals pinned or speeches given, every soul who crossed that invisible line carried with them the same unshakable thought, that it wasn't always the loudest voices or the most decorated uniforms that stood between life and destruction. Sometimes it was the silent resolve of a creature bound by loyalty and instinct alone, a soldier whose heart beat with unwavering courage, whose presence alone had rewritten the ending of a day that could have become a nightmare. And as night fully claimed the sky and the stars blinked awake overhead, Titan turned his head toward the darkened road beyond the checkpoint, his eyes reflecting the faint light with a glimmer that seemed almost otherworldly. Without a command, he moved forward, his paws silent against the pavement, his posture calm but ready, his steps the quiet march of a hero who knew that beyond every horizon lay another fight waiting to be faced. And in that final unforgettable moment, as Titan disappeared into the night alongside his handler, every heart left behind understood a simple, eternal truth. Sometimes heroes wear no badges, they carry no weapons, and they speak no words. Sometimes they simply walk beside us, unseen until the moment we need them most. Their loyalty a shield, and their courage a light in the darkest of hours.